They invited me to dinner, then left me without a chair, as if I'd quietly slip away like some unwanted guest. But I just laughed, walked up to the hostess stand, and said, "I'll take my own table," center of the room. Because what they didn't know is that the owner of this restaurant was someone they couldn't even dream of. Before I continue this story, if any part of it feels familiar, leave a comment. Who knows, maybe my story was once yours, too. I'm Maeve Whitlock, 69 years old now, and I still taste the bitterness of a dawn nearly 40 years behind me. Back then, I was 29, a widow in a cramped walk-up on East 7th, Austin, Texas, and the day began the same way it always did, with the thin smell of cheap gas and even cheaper coffee. The apartment walls were the color of old parchment, stained by summers that fried the paint and winters that never quite warmed up. I stood at the rust-spotted stove, coaxing a sputtering blue flame beneath a dented aluminum pot. One scoop of grounds had to stretch for 4 mugs, so I poured extra water. The brew came out the color of weak tea, but the ritual mattered more than the strength. I needed that steam in my face to remind me I was awake and still moving. Behind me, on a mattress, pieced together from a split sofa, my 3 kids slept shoulder to shoulder. Griffin, 8, already big-boned like his daddy, snored lightly. Julian, 6, curled into the crook of Griffin's arm, thumb planted firmly in his mouth. Little Celia, just 4, wheezed with a cough that never really left her. Her chest rattled, in the dark, a fragile metronome ticking out my worry. Their father, Cal, should have been there to roll them over, to rub Vicks on Celia's back, to tell me the coffee could wait. But Cal's pickup had spun on wet asphalt 2 years earlier, leaving a twisted guardrail and all our tomorrows hanging in midair. Since then, every morning felt like freefall. I slipped into my sea-green cleaning uniform, patched at both elbows, polyester scratched where the seam had frayed, but it saved me time. No decisions, no mirrors. I bent down and kissed each forehead, whispered a promise I prayed I could keep. Then set breakfast in place, 2 slices of dry toast, tucked in a paper sack, and a pint of milk, sitting like a white blessing on the refrigerator shelf. Celia stirred, coughed once, and settled again. I tucked the quilt higher over her small shoulders. At 5:15 a.m. sharp, I wheeled my second-hand Schwinn onto the street. The air held that raw cedar scent Texas wears in winter, sharp enough to wake the dead. Pedaling west toward the river, I let the pink edge of sunrise guide me to Diamond Westlake Hotel. The lobby lights glowed like false daylight, and by 5:45 my rubber gloves were on, cart stocked with bleach and fresh towels. Room after room wiped away someone else's night. Lipstick on glass, sand and tubs, a forgotten cufflink, cold as regret. By late afternoon my legs ached, but another shift waited. 3 blocks down, the Drake and Niles Insurance Building kept its own secrets. I swiped in at 6 and mopped linoleum until it shone hard enough to hurt the eyes. The fluorescent hum, the echo of my bucket wheels, the distant ring of a phone no one would answer after hours. That was the music that carried me to almost midnight. I'd ride home, under a sky cut wide with stars, the tired kind of stars that never grant wishes. One December night, the wind pushed straight through the window gaps, and Celia's cough turned ragged. Fever lit her skin. I pressed a washcloth to her forehead, counted pennies in a jelly jar, and knew the math was impossible. The private clinic wanted a deposit we didn't have. The county hospital was overrun and miles away. I sat on the floor, back against the peeling wall, holding her upright so she could breathe easier. Griffin and Julian watched, silent, their eyes too old for their faces. Before dawn bled through the blinds, Celia gave a soft sigh, almost a kitten's yawn, and went still. Her small hand slipped from mine like a ribbon sliding off a package. Pneumonia. The doctor at the free clinic confirmed later, though the diagnosis felt as hollow as the promises I'd mumbled through the night. I buried her in Potter's Field. On the east side, a patch of red dirt where the city lays its forgotten. No stone, just a numbered stake. I knelt there alone after the service, fingers digging into the soil until my nails split, and swore no other child of mine would lie in that place. Rage, grief, love, they braided themselves into a single rope, and I knotted it tight around my heart. The next Monday, I walked into Austin Mutual Bank and opened my first savings account. $20 that week, maybe $30 the next. Sometimes, it was only loose change, but the passbook filled, line by line, proof that the future could be written in ink instead of tears. 2 years later, the balance finally looked like more than small talk. I enrolled Griffin in St. Joseph's Academy, the cheapest private school that still boasted sturdy textbooks and teachers who learned your kid's name by the second day. Julian, restless and bright, got evening science classes at the Y. I cycled an extra 5 miles each night to cover the tuition, lungs burning, thighs screaming, but I did it with a strange, stubborn joy. Every pedal stroke said, not again, not ever. That cold dawn in East Austin still visits my dreams. The hurt hasn't dulled, but it has shape, weight, something I can lift, set aside, and keep walking. Because I promised 3 children, under a patchwork quilt, that their mother would not quit. And some promises are the very bones that hold you upright. It was the middle of March, 2025. I was 69 years old, living alone in a small studio apartment in Brooklyn. The place wasn't much. 1 window, a gas stove that clicked twice before it lit, and a bathroom with a mirror that had seen better days, but it was mine. Rent was cheaper if you paid cash, and I didn't need more space than what held a bed, a chair, and the little table where I folded my clothes and sometimes rested my back with a cup of instant coffee. That Tuesday, around noon, I got a text from Griffin. Mom, Saturday night on the rooftop of Haven Room, be there at 7. Don't forget to dress nicely. Just like that, no explanation, no emoji, not even a please. I stared at the message a good minute before I typed back, okay, I'll be there. My heart fluttered a little. I didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was just the way he said dress nicely. It's not something he ever says. It made me wonder. It made me nervous too. Saturday came fast. I spent the morning cleaning up my apartment, habit, mostly. I set out the only dress I owned that still fit me right, a purple boat-neck dress. I'd kept hanging in the back of the closet for years. I'd bought it for special occasions, though life hadn't had many of those lately. The fabric was worn but clean. It had a kind of grace to it, even after all this time. I pulled out my wallet, found the lipstick I'd saved from Christmas 3 years ago. It was one of those little beauty gift sets they sell at the pharmacy around the holidays. The tube was almost empty, and the color had started to clump. But I warmed it with my fingers and put on just enough to give me a little color. I left early, taking the subway from Brooklyn to Manhattan. It was a cool evening, and the train was half full. The city lights flickered outside the window as we passed over the bridge. My mind wandered the whole ride. I wondered what Griffin was up to. Maybe he was being promoted and wanted me to meet his colleagues. Maybe he had a surprise. Maybe he just wanted to celebrate with family. I didn't know, but I was excited. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been invited somewhere where I was supposed to dress nicely. When I got off at 33rd Street, I spotted a chocolate shop just down the block from the Haven Room. I stopped inside. The shelves were filled with fancy boxes wrapped in gold foil and tied with silk ribbons. My hands trembled a little as I reached for a medium-sized box of dark chocolates. It wasn't cheap, but I wanted to give Griffin something to say congratulations, even if I didn't know exactly what for. I paid for it with my grocery money. I'd make do with rice and beans the rest of the week. I reached the Haven Room just before 7. The building was tall and all glass. The entrance sparkled under warm lights, and the doorman opened the door with a nod. I stepped inside, heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The elevator was made of glass. I could see the whole city as it carried me up. I knew this place. I knew it very well, because years ago, when it was still just plans on paper, I had helped invest in it. Not a big investor, just a small partner with a loyal friend of my late husband's, Solomon. We never told Griffin. He never asked. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into the restaurant's lobby. Everything was just as beautiful as I remembered. Polished floors, white roses, and a warm, golden glow from the rooftop lights above. And then I saw Brielle, my daughter-in-law, Griffin's wife, standing at the hostess desk. She looked me over from head to toe. Her eyes moved slow, like she was checking a receipt. She gave a thin smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Maeve," she said, her voice flat. "You're here." I smiled back and handed her the box of chocolates. "This is for Griffin. I figured he might like a little something sweet. Heard he got a promotion." She took the box and gave a short nod. "Thanks. I'll put this behind the desk." Then she turned to the hostess and said something I didn't catch. The hostess nodded, and Brielle turned back to me. "They'll bring you upstairs in a minute. Griffin's still with some people." I nodded and looked around. There were couples dressed in suits and cocktail dresses, waiters carrying trays of drinks, and a soft jazz melody floating through the air. It was beautiful up here. It felt far from the little apartment I came from, far from the mornings of weak coffee and the nights of sore hands. I waited quietly by the entrance, watching the people, holding onto the edge of my purse. No one said anything else to me. No one asked if I needed anything. I just stood there, trying not to let the smile slip from my face. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know why Brielle looked at me that way, and I didn't know what Griffin had planned. But I stood there, in my purple dress and my old shoes, with the city lights behind me, waiting, the way I had waited 4 years, for a break, for an answer, for someone to say, "You did good, Maeve, you did enough." And that's how that evening began. Brielle didn't bother to look back as she led me across the rooftop. Her heels clicked, mine shuffled to keep up. At the far end of the long table, Griffin lifted his glass, Julian mirrored him, and their friends chimed a loud cheers. Crystal clinked, laughter spilled. 6 seats, exactly 6. I stopped at the corner of the linen. "Looks like somebody forgot a chair for your mother," I said, voice steady but low. Griffin rested his glass on the table. "Mom, about that?" He inhaled lightly, eyes sliding past me to the skyline. "I'm really sorry you came all this way, but I think you'll be more comfortable somewhere else. This place can be," he searched for the word, "overwhelming." "Overwhelming," I echoed. I rode the subway, not a rocket. Julian smothered a grin behind his palm. One of Griffin's colleagues leaned in to whisper, shoulders shaking. They stopped just short of outright snickering. Brielle folded her arms, head tilting, a smile polished thin. "There's a wonderful McDonald's at the end of the block," she said. "Something simpler might suit you better." "McDonald's," I repeated, tasting the word. "Do they serve humility with the fries these days?" Julian's friend barked a laugh. Griffin shot him a warning look but didn't face me. "Mom, please, let's not make this awkward." "Oh, I wouldn't dare," I said. "I wouldn't want to upset the seating chart." Brielle's lips tightened. Griffin tried. He really did. The reservation was set weeks ago. 6 seats, prix menu, no room for last-minute changes. 6, I said again. I laid a hand on the cold back of a chair. 3 family members and 3 spares for your networking buddies. "Mom," Griffin warned, soft but sharp. I let the word hang between us, let silence expand until the music drifted in from somewhere else. A tiny bubble of laughter started in my chest, ridiculous, nervous, unstoppable. It slipped out as a giggle, then grew, rolling into a laugh so loud it bounced off the silverware. Heads turned down the table. Conversation stopped. Julian's smile vanished. Brielle's eyes narrowed. Griffin's jaw set tight. No one reached out. No one stood up. I drew a breath, calmed myself, and spoke plainly. "You invited me." I tapped the phone in my purse. "You said dress nicely." I did. "You said 7 o'clock. I came." I didn't ask for caviar, just a chair. Griffin shifted, uneasy. "Mom, I misjudged." "You did," I agreed, "but not the way you think." My voice stayed level. "The chair isn't the problem. It's the space you decided I don't belong in." Brielle looked away, studying her manicured nails as though every word bored her. Julian's eyes dropped to his drink. I straightened, smoothed the front of my purple dress, and let that moment freeze around them. Then I laughed again, short, bright, final, and stepped back from the table. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, and turned. I crossed the floor alone, heartbeat steady now, toward the reception desk. Solomon was there, gray hair, kind eyes that crinkled when he saw me. "Mrs. Whitlock," he greeted, voice warm. "Been too long." I smiled, felt my shoulders loosen for the first time since I left Brooklyn. "Good to see you, Solomon." He leaned over the counter. "Everything all right?" I lifted my chin. "I need a table." Center of the room. Solomon's brows rose, then settled in understanding. "Of course, right away." He waved to a waiter. "VIP setup, now." Crisp reply. Linen whisked over mahogany. Candles lit in seconds. Silver gleamed. He stepped aside, arm extended. "Your table, Mrs. Whitlock." "Thank you," I said, taking the seat. One chair, solid beneath me, waiting the whole time. Behind me, the clink of Griffin's glass sounded small, distant. Their conversation resumed, but every now and again it faltered, drifting toward the laughter that had jolted the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. A server appeared. "What can we bring you this evening?" I opened the menu, eyes skimming without reading. "Start with coffee," I said, strong. My voice stayed gentle, firm. I've had enough thin drinks for one night. He nodded and left. Solomon lingered. Anything else, Mrs. Whitlock? Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. Make sure the bill comes. To me. He hesitated. Griffin, I said. Me. A slow smile spread across his face. As you wish. He dipped his head and moved away. I sat alone at the center of the rooftop, steam soon curling from a fresh cup. One seat. No confusion. No apologies needed. Behind the rim of porcelain, I caught my reflection in the window. Purple dress, silver hair, lipstick a shade too bright under the lights, and I thought about chairs, about rooms, about who decides where anyone belongs. Then I took a sip, let the coffee burn warm down my throat, and waited for the night to finish rearranging itself around the choice I'd made. The subway let me off a little after midnight, the Brooklyn platform empty except for a stray coffee cup rolling in circles. I walked the 5 blocks home, keys cold in my fist, and climbed the 3 flights to my studio. The lock clicked loud in the hallway hush. Inside, the place felt smaller than usual. I slipped off my shoes, hung the purple dress on its wooden hanger, and spread it out so the wrinkles would fall. My hands shook when I reached up to unclip the dime store earrings. The clasps were suddenly too tiny for fingers that had scrubbed grout most of their life. I laid the earrings in their saucer by the window, 1 little ring of fake pearls, 1 chipped rhinestone. On the scarred wooden tables sat the unopened box of chocolate I'd bought for Griffin. Gold ribbons still perfect. I tugged it free, peeled back the lid, and picked a piece from the first row. Sea salt dark, his favorite, not mine. I bit down. The taste was sharp, smoky, almost medicinal. I chewed twice, swallowed, and realized the bitterness blooming on my tongue had nothing to do with cocoa. The room was quiet except for the clicking radiator. I rubbed my arms, heading for the kettle, when the phone rang. Griffin's name glowed across the cracked screen. For a second I thought of letting it slide to voicemail, but habit won. I pressed record on the little app Julian once installed for me, just in case, he'd said, and lifted the phone. Mom, you home safe? Griffin's voice was soft, practiced, gentle. I'm fine, son. A pause. Then the words came out measured, each one precise as a scalpel. Mom, we think it might be best for you to consider a nursing facility. There's a place in Queens, quiet neighborhood, affordable, they handle everything. The kettle's pilot light clicked behind me, a tiny flare. I handle everything, I said, my voice low. I know you try, he answered, but we worry. It's a lot, living alone. This would be easier. Easier for who? Griffin. Silence stopped then. We'll talk more later. The call ended with a soft beep, just as the kettle whistled. I set the phone down, but it lit up almost at once. Julian? I let it ring twice, then answered. Mom, he said, business brisk. Griffin probably called already. I booked a car service for next Tuesday, 11 a.m. They'll take you straight to the facility. Don't worry, the place is great. I toured it. You booked a car. My voice sounded distant, like it came from the hallway. Yeah, look, it's all arranged. Love you. Click. Before I could lay the phone down, a text banner slid across the screen. Brielle, please don't overthink. We just want the best for you. Don't pull another stunt like tonight. People thought something was wrong with you. A stunt. Set the phone face down so the messages couldn't stare back. The kettle kept screaming. I turned off the flame, but I didn't pour the water. Instead, I sat at the table under the yellow lamp, palms flat on the surface. The light showed every ridge and vein on my skin. These hands had wiped hotel mirrors, emptied ashtrays in conference rooms, folded hospital corners on sheets that weren't mine. 40 years of bleach and winter wind had cracked them deep, but they still closed into fists just fine. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the deerskin notebook, the one I started the night Celia died, when I swore life wouldn't catch me unprepared again. Page after page held columns of dates, dollar amounts, compound interest scribbles in pencil. $20 the first week, 30 the next, then stock symbols, dividend notations, restaurant equity percentages, my whole invisible history in neat, stubborn lines. I reached for the laptop on the shelf, tapped the space bar. The screen glowed, asking for a password. My fingers typed it without hesitation. 6 numbers, 1 name. The online statement opened, a tidy list of accounts, balances climbing steady like steps, savings, investments, the quarterly payout from Haven Room, numbers that could buy more than any nursing home bed. I clicked the legal folder icon. Up came scanned PDFs, partnership agreement, amendment, notarized signatures, mine and Solomon's ink side by side. 10% became 20 the night Griffin tried to seat me nowhere. It was all there, black letters on white. I closed the laptop, slid it aside. The room flicked to darkness when I snapped off the lamp, but I didn't move to bed. Instead, I stayed at the table, eyes adjusting, letting the city's sodium streetlight leak through the window and paint faint stripes on the floorboards. Somewhere below, a siren wailed. Upstairs, someone's television laughed at a canned joke. I folded my hands together, steady now, and whispered the first item of a new list forming in my head. Tasks, phone calls, transfers, names of lawyers who specialized in elder abuse, each detail lined up like soldiers. I wasn't tired. I wouldn't sleep. I would plan, carefully, the way I once measured coffee grounds to stretch for 4 mugs, because my children had forgotten that promises can cut both ways. And they were about to relearn who I was. In the dim studio, surrounded by the things they thought I lacked, I let the night settle. It felt solid, almost comforting, like the grip of a wrench before the first turn. Morning found me sitting at the same wooden table, my back sore from not sleeping, my eyes dry but wide open. I hadn't changed clothes. The apartment was quiet, except for the low groan of the pipes and the soft hum of the city already awake outside. My hands moved on their own, grabbing the old kettle, lighting the burner, filling the filter with coffee grounds. It was a routine that hadn't failed me in 40 years. At least that hadn't changed. I carried the cup to the table, steam rising in slow spirals. Then I reached for the deerskin notebook. The leather was soft, worn smooth at the corners from years of use. I opened to the first page. 2009, 1-bedroom condo in East Austin. I remembered how I used to sweep that porch barefoot in the Texas heat. The handwriting was a little shaky in the early pages. Over time, it grew tighter, more sure. Next came the Haven room. First 10%, then 25% equity. No one knew, except me and Solomon. There were entries for small businesses, to launch a shipping store, a modest stake in a Vietnamese restaurant over on Grand Street. My notes were plain: income, reinvestment, growth percentages, taxes, and projected returns. Every page was another piece of my survival, my independence, my revenge. If I ever needed it, I picked up the phone and called Solomon. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, voice bright. "How are you this morning?" "Solomon, I need to meet, in private, at your office in Midtown. Of course, 11 tomorrow morning. That works." There was a pause. Then, his voice lowered. "You still hold your 25%. Mrs. Whitlock, you're the second largest shareholder. No one knows, not even Griffin." "I know," I said flatly. "That's how I want it. Until I say otherwise." He didn't press. Understood. I hung up and reached for an envelope lying nearby. I turned it over and wrote in sharp, dark letters, "Reveal or not, WHERE. When?" I slid the envelope under my notebook, like a question, waiting for its answer. Then I picked up the phone again and called a number I'd only used once before. Camila Reyes, a state lawyer. Her receptionist picked up. "Reyes, legal. I need to speak to Ms. Reyes. This is Maeve Whitlock." Just a moment. A brief pause. Then a calm, assured voice came through. "Mrs. Whitlock, it's good to hear from you. Camila, I need to revise my will. I want to cut 2 names out, add new beneficiaries, and I need legal guidance to sever inheritance rights." "Understood. Do you have any existing documents I should review?" "I do. They're all in order. I can see you Wednesday at 9 a.m. Book it." We exchanged no more than what was needed. I liked that about her. Business was business. After I hung up, I sat for a while, letting the silence stretch. Then I opened the recording app on my phone. I found the audio from the night before. Griffin's voice came through, carefully rehearsed, each word clean like it was copied from a pamphlet. "Mom, we think it's best you consider a nursing facility." I let it play until the end. Then I saved the file to a locked folder and backed it up to my external USB. I labeled it Griffin_call_225_proof_01.mp3. Next, I pulled out the laptop, logged into my bank account. The numbers greeted me like old friends. Savings, investment, returns, stock value, everything was healthy, stable. I opened my file system, found the digital copies of my equity agreements with Solomon, all signed, dated, witnessed, all binding, legally airtight. I let out a long breath, then clicked over to email. I opened a new message. No address, no message body, just the subject line. To the sons, I gave everything. I stared at those words a long time before saving it as a draft. The sunlight had shifted. I stood, went to the window, looked down at the sidewalk below. A delivery guy on a bike, a mother tugging a toddler. Normal life. I turned back to my table and gathered the documents, the bank records, the investment files, the will, the contact sheet for Camila, all into a neat stack. I clipped them together and placed them in a blue plastic folder I kept for important papers. Then, I went to the drawer. I pulled out the legal hard copy of the original Haven Room agreement Solomon and I signed in 2015, and the amendments from 2 years ago that raised my equity to 25%. I slid those into the folder too. Before leaving, I grabbed the deerskin notebook, tucked it into my bag, and took one last look around the studio. The room was the same as it had always been, tight, quiet, mine, but I felt taller in it somehow, like I'd taken up more space overnight. I didn't need to tell anyone where I was going. I didn't owe anyone explanations anymore, especially not the ones who thought I was fading, who saw me as fragile, outdated, expendable. I locked the door behind me. The key slid easily into my coat pocket, and as I stepped into the hallway with my head held high and the folder tucked firmly under one arm, I said out loud, quietly but clearly, "Now we begin." The following Saturday came colder than I expected, with wind biting the sides of my face as I stood waiting for the car. 7 o'clock sharp, same time Griffin and Brielle had set the table for my humiliation the week before. Same rooftop, same restaurant, but this time, the story would turn. I wore a cream-colored suit, tailored just enough to remind folks I hadn't lost my shape to time yet. The silk scarf Solomon had gifted me years ago, back at our first shareholders meeting, rested lightly on my shoulders. It was teal with little gold threads that shimmered just right under the lobby lights. When I arrived at the doors of the Haven Room, the host stepped aside without a word. Solomon had made sure of that. From across the lobby, I saw him approaching, Solomon, in his usual dark suit, silver cufflinks glinting. He smiled, genuine and wide. "Welcome back, Mrs. Whitlock." "Evening, Solomon," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Let's begin." We walked in together. The chandelier over the dining floor spilled gold light across everything. Tables polished to a shine, silverware perfectly aligned, crystal goblets catching the glow. The center table, usually reserved for diplomats, CEOs, or men who talked loud on phones, was waiting for me. Heads turned before I reached the center. Griffin's voice was the first to break. "What the hell?" He was sitting right there with Brielle, Julian, and a few of their usual crowd, all dressed up, laughing over their drinks, until they saw me. The laughter died on contact. Their expressions tightened like wet rope. I stepped beside the table and nodded to Solomon. He gave a subtle wave. At that moment, like clockwork, a woman in a burgundy coat entered the restaurant. She wasn't a regular. That was clear from the way people glanced at her. She was followed by a man carrying a large camera. Her press badge glinted under the chandelier. The New York Post. Solomon leaned over and whispered, "All set." I smiled, turned to face the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice strong, clear. "My name is Maeve Whitlock. I'm proud to say I've been one of the owners of this establishment for the last 15 years. A few murmurs, silverware paused midair. People turned toward our table with curious eyes. Brielle stiffened. Julian's drink hovered near his lips, untouched. "To thank you all for dining with us tonight," I continued, "I'd like to offer each table a bottle of Chateau Margaux on the house. Solomon, would you arrange that, please?" He gave a respectful nod. Waiters were already in motion. Griffin finally found his voice. "Wait, what? Mom, what are you talking about?" I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and laid it gently on the center of their table. I opened it slowly, revealing copies of my signed investment contracts, equity certificates, profit-sharing agreements, every legal proof of ownership I had. I turned one sheet toward Griffin, one toward Brielle, one toward Julian. "This," I said plainly, "is what I built while you weren't looking." Griffin's mouth opened, then closed. Brielle looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Her hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Julian couldn't even look up. Then Solomon stepped forward, calm and collected. "Mr. Whitlock," he said gently, "your mother is my business partner. She invested in the Haven Room before the building had walls. Every chandelier, every tile, every bottle of wine tonight, she made that possible." I let the words sit for a moment. Then I reached into my purse once more and placed my phone on the table. One press of a button, and Griffin's voice played loud and clear for everyone nearby to hear. "Mom, we think it's best you consider a nursing facility. There's a place in Queens, affordable, quiet." A few people at the surrounding tables shifted uncomfortably. Then I played the next file, a video from the restaurant's security camera. It showed the moment I arrived at the rooftop the week before, no seat at the table. Griffin sipping his wine without looking at me, Brielle smirking, Julian chuckling. My laugh, sharp, hollow, heartbreaking, echoed through the speakers before I turned and walked away. Silence swallowed the room whole. I turned back to my sons. "You didn't invite me to dinner," I said quietly. "You invited me to disappear." Brielle's face was pale now, her mouth slightly open. Julian looked sick. Griffin looked like he wanted to speak, but nothing came. I straightened my spine, picked up my bag, and added one final sentence. "From this moment on," I said, locking eyes with Griffin, "you no longer have the right to call me mother." The flash of the photographer's camera burst through the moment, then another, then another. The reporter scribbled notes furiously. The whispers began, first in pockets, then in waves. "She's their mother. She owns the place. They tried to put her in a home. Unbelievable." Griffin slumped back in his chair, eyes burning but silent. Brielle covered her mouth, blinking fast. Julian looked down and never looked back up. I turned from the table, Solomon at my side, and walked back to my seat beneath the chandelier. I didn't sit for long, just long enough to sip a glass of my own wine, let the silence soak in, and smile. Not bitter, not smug, just quiet and satisfied. Because sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it just takes the seat it was always meant to have. 2 days after that night under the chandelier, I took the Q train uptown to meet Camila Reyes at her office on East 45th Street. Midtown always felt like another planet. Cold wind funneling between tall glass buildings, people walking too fast, with nowhere warm to land. I wore my gray wool coat and leather gloves, folder clutched tight to my chest. Inside was everything: bank statements, investment records, real estate papers, savings accounts, life insurance, every single asset that had ever, formally or informally, had Griffin or Julian's name anywhere near it. Camila's office sat on the 17th floor of a building that smelled like polished steel and dry money. She opened the door herself. "Mrs. Whitlock," she said, "right on time." "I always am," I replied. I didn't work all my life to be late for the good parts. We sat across from each other in a private room, the kind with no windows, no distractions. She took the folder from me and started flipping through the documents. Her eyes scanned fast, her pen tapping lightly against her notepad. After several minutes, she looked up. "What do you want to do with all of this?" I folded my hands and looked her dead in the eye. "Cut them off, clean. I don't want them to inherit a penny. Not my house, not my name, not my debts, not my legacy." She didn't blink. "You're sure?" "I'm past sure," I said. "But I want to give them a choice." "A choice, yes. I want to offer them a deal, a way to earn their way back. Not into my heart, God knows that door's closed, but into decency. I want to give them a path to repay every cent I gave them over the last 20 years. Camila sat back, processing. "Do you have a rough number?" $2.8 million, I said. "Loans, school tuition, rent money, startup cash, their weddings, their kids' hospital bills, vacations I paid for but never got invited to join. Add interest if you want, but I don't care. I want that number in writing." She nodded. "And how would you like them to repay it?" I smiled, not unkindly. "Through labor, real work, minimum wage, a year each. That's 12 months of scrubbing floors, serving food, doing something useful. Then they can walk away. No inheritance after that. None. That's non-negotiable." "Any restrictions?" "Yes," I said. "They must agree not to contact the press, not to spin the story their way, and not to approach me unless it's for business." Camila nodded, writing everything down. By the time the clock struck 3 p.m., the document was drafted. Camila called it the Termination and Labor Recompense Contract. It was split into 3 clean sections. Part 1, Agreement to repay the full support sum of $2.8 million through full-time documented labor at or near minimum wage for a period of no less than 12 consecutive months. Part 2. Legal relinquishment of all inheritance rights, including posthumous access to assets, estate, and name. Part 3. Binding non-disclosure and non-defamation clause, including prohibition from engaging with any form of media or public discussion regarding the agreement or its parties. I proofread every word. My name was signed last, in deliberate blue ink, one steady line, no hesitation. I didn't call my sons. I didn't send a warning. I simply sent the contract in a formal email addressed to Griffin Whitlock, Julian Whitlock, and Brielle Whitlock, with the subject line, "Documents attached, please read and acknowledge." No threats, no message, just the papers. 3 days later, they showed up. It was a rainy afternoon. Camilla had me wait in the adjacent room while she greeted them. I listened as they came in, quiet shoes, no chatter. When she brought me in, they were already seated, Griffin on the left, Julian in the middle, Brielle on the right. None of them looked rested. No smugness, no smug clothes either, just dark jackets, tired eyes, and unbrushed hair. They didn't say a word at first. I stood across from them, folder once again in hand, though there was nothing new to show. The real weight was invisible now. Camilla broke the silence. "Mrs. Whitlock, as requested, will proceed one by one." She handed the pen to Griffin first. He stared at the paper in front of him, lips parted slightly like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. He just leaned forward, jaw clenched, and signed. Brielle went second. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. She bit her lip, eyes glassy. When the ink hit the page, she let out a small breath, and one tear slipped down her cheek. Still, she didn't say a word. Julian was last. He reached for the pen with both hands, fingers stiff. He looked up at me just once, then looked down again. His name came out shaky, but readable. Like a boy signing a permission slip he didn't understand. I stood the entire time. I didn't cry. I didn't soften. I just watched them. 3 people I once held in my arms, now strangers at a business table. Camilla slid the documents into her briefcase. "The agreement takes effect Monday morning," she said calmly. "Each of you will receive individual instructions, locations, and a 12-month employment schedule by email. This is now binding." Griffin finally opened his mouth. "Is there anything? I mean, is this really the only way?" I tilted my head. "You offered me a bed in a nursing home. I'm offering you 12 months of honest work. Seems fair." No one spoke again. Camilla stood, meeting adjourned. "I'll walk you out." They filed out slowly, not looking back. After the door clicked shut, Camilla turned to me. "You okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm free." And for the first time in decades, I felt it. The first week passed like a slow-moving train I watched from afar, not with worry, not with motherly concern, but with the quiet distance of someone finally choosing herself. Griffin started Monday morning at 5 a.m., reporting to the back entrance of a Macy's in the Bronx. No more silk ties, no air-conditioned office. No one called him sir. Instead, he was handed rubber gloves and a bucket, then told to scrub the tile floor of the employee restroom. His supervisor, a man named Kenny with a limp and a loud voice, didn't know or care that Griffin used to sign off on 6-figure loans. "You missed a spot," Kenny barked more than once, tapping the floor with his boot heel. Griffin's back ached before sunrise. By the end of the second shift, his fingers were raw and smelled of bleach. Brielle took a kitchen position at the Haven Room. Irony, I suppose, has a sense of humor. She started in the dish pit. Hot water, suds, burnt pans, and a never-ending stream of plates from the dining room above. She peeled onions until her eyes watered so badly she had to step outside. Solomon made sure she clocked in and out like every other employee. "No special privileges. Your shift ends when the floor shines," he told her, not unkindly, but firm. She nodded, biting her lip, not daring to answer back. Julian, my youngest, began work in the maintenance crew at the East Austin property I still rented out. I'd bought that building with cash back in 2012, flipped it with sweat and strategy. Now, he walked those same halls, carrying a mop and a toolbox. His job was to repair leaky pipes, replace busted light bulbs, and scrape black mold off old bathroom walls. In the second week, he repainted 3 units, 2 coats each. On Wednesday, The third floor flooded and he had to crawl under the sink in soaked jeans, elbow deep in grime. By the third week, the first cracks appeared. Brielle burned her forearm when a fryer pan popped oil while she was cleaning beneath it. She didn't scream, just bit down on her tongue and kept scrubbing. I saw the red bandage on her wrist in the weekly report Solomon sent. Griffin, who used to boast about working 12-hour days behind a desk, was now icing his lower back after every shift. Camila forwarded his health complaint from the work program, chronic lumbar stress, aggravated by manual labor. She noted, dryly, that this was common in physical jobs. Julian was the one that got to me most, though I didn't show it. Midway through the week, I checked in on the internal camera feed from the Austin property. Not to spy, just habit. The feed showed the back stairwell, right by the boiler room. I saw him there, leaning against the concrete wall, head dropped forward, elbows on his knees. He wasn't moving, not sleeping either, just sitting in the stillness. When he finally looked up, I saw his eyes were red, not from sweat, not from dust, just red. I didn't watch any longer. I clicked off the feed, closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry. That's not where I live anymore. This wasn't cruelty. This was a transaction. They signed their names. They chose the terms. While they clocked in and out, while they worked overtime to earn back what they took for granted. I moved north, quietly, with no announcements. I left the studio in Brooklyn and took up residence in a small cabin in Vermont. Something off the grid but wired just enough to stay connected with Camila and Solomon. No television, no city sounds, just trees, a front porch, and a kettle that still whistles. I kept to myself. I didn't check their social media, didn't ask Camila how they were coping. Every Monday, I received their work logs and evaluations. I read them the way a manager would review employee performance, clinical, factual, without warmth. I'd stopped seeing them as sons. In that part of my mind, they were just personnel. What surprised me was how natural that distance felt. I began spending afternoons drafting paperwork for something I'd been thinking about for years. A fund, not for them, not for me. For the mothers like me, women who'd given everything, sleep, youth, bodies, marriages, only to be discarded when their usefulness ran dry. I called it Still Standing Trust. I opened the fund with an initial deposit of $5,000. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough. To start, the mission was simple: financial support and legal assistance for aging women cut off by their own children. No forms asking if they had grandkids. No judgment. Just dignity. Real dignity. The kind you hold when your name means nothing at the Thanksgiving table, but you still sit up straight anyway. The wind outside carried the smell of pine. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and a pencil, writing out the bylaws of the trust in a notebook. One line I circled twice. This trust exists to honor the labor that no one clapped for. I didn't know if they were still crying. I didn't care if their backs hurt or their egos bruised. What I knew was this: they were learning something I'd known since I was 29, kneeling over a hot mop bucket after Celia died, that the world doesn't owe you ease. You earn your place here, one shift at a time. A full year had passed. The air in Vermont had started to change. Cooler mornings, sharper winds, trees turning that deep red-orange that always made me pause on the porch a little longer. Out here, time moved honest. No deadlines, no city noise, just the crunch of gravel under boots, the soft hum of the kettle, and the sound of wind pushing through the pines. Then the first letter came, postmarked from Manhattan, handwritten on cream paper. It was from Griffin, just 4 paragraphs. No request, no manipulation, no signature with love. Just a plain admission. Maeve, if you're willing, I'd like to see you. I don't want anything. I just want to apologize. Properly. No cameras, no games, just me and the truth. 2 days later, a letter from Brielle arrived. The handwriting surprised me. Neat, clean, and strangely human. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to say it. I was cruel. I mocked the very hands that raised the man I married. I want you to know I've changed, and I want to tell you that in person. Then Julian. His letter was shorter, shakier. Mom, if I can still call you that. I followed, because it was easier than thinking for myself. And I'm sorry. I'd like to come see you too, if you'll allow it. I didn't respond by mail. Instead, I had Camila send one message to all 3. If you want to talk, you'll come here. My cabin. No media. No photos, no one else. You'll sit at my table and say what you came to say. That's the only offer. The last weekend of October, they came. They arrived together in a rental SUV, kicking up a line of dust as they rolled slowly down the dirt road. I saw them through the window, 3 silhouettes stepping out under the shadow of the sugar maples. The driveway was covered in red and gold leaves, the last breath of autumn painting the ground like fire. I didn't come out to greet them. I let them find their way to the porch, to the screen door that creaked just the way I liked it. Inside, I'd set the table with 4 chipped ceramic mugs and a pot of cinnamon tea. No fanfare, no pies, no tablecloth, just the smell of warm spices and the weight of everything unsaid. They stood just inside the kitchen for a moment, as if waiting for permission. I motioned to the table. Sit they did. Griffin on the left, Julian to the right, Brielle across from me. I sat last, facing them all. The steam from the mugs curled between us. Griffin cleared his throat first. He looked older than I remembered, tired in the eyes, softer around the jaw. Maeve, he said. Not Mom. He caught himself. I was wrong. Not just that night. Not just with the nursing home. I was wrong for decades. I thought because I worked hard, I was better. But I see now, everything I had, my degree, my house, my job, I only had because you gave up everything for me. I didn't answer. I sipped my tea, let him keep going. I didn't earn what I had. I inherited it, off your back. And when I thought you had nothing left to offer, I tossed you aside like a burden. He swallowed. I'm sorry. Next to him, Brielle's hands were wrapped around her mug like it was the only warm thing in her life. I hated you, she said quietly. Because I didn't understand you. Because you made me feel small. But working in your kitchen, cleaning the grease out of pots, standing for hours in silence, I finally saw what you did for all of us. What you gave up. She looked down, her voice shaking. I was awful. I'm sorry for every word I ever said that made you feel less than what you are. Julian looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his voice cracked. I always followed Griffin. He told me what to think, what to feel. I was too scared to have my own opinions. But you didn't deserve that. I made choices that hurt you, and I was too weak to admit it, until now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. I want you to have this. It's nothing big, just the first paycheck I earned after the year ended. Cleaning drains, mopping stairwells. It's real. It's mine, and I want to give it to you. I didn't touch the envelope. I didn't say yes or no. I just looked at him and nodded once. There was silence for a while. No one rushed to fill it. I looked at each of them, carefully. Griffin, the boy who once clung to my skirt while I cleaned hotel floors. Brielle, the girl who once saw me as background noise. Julian, the baby I used to rock when he had night terrors. And yet, they weren't my children anymore. Not in the way they used to be. Something had changed, and I didn't mourn it. Finally, I said, I forgive you. Griffin's head dropped. Brielle wiped her eye. Julian just exhaled. But, I continued, I'm not going back to the way things were. I've learned to love myself too much for that. I poured more tea. My voice was steady. From now on, I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your financial safety net. I'm not your mother in the old sense of the word. I'm Maeve, a woman, a person who has bled and stood and built a life of her own. They nodded slowly, as if trying to catch up. I'll set one boundary, I said. You get one phone call a year. On Thanksgiving, no more, no less. They looked stunned, but not angry, just humbled. They accepted it. Outside, the sun was setting, casting orange light through the cabin windows. They stood, one by one, and thanked me. No hugs, no dramatics. Just a quiet, respectful goodbye. I walked them to the porch. They got into the SUV and backed slowly down the drive. I stood there, until their car disappeared beyond the bend of trees. And when I turned back into the cabin, I felt it, the softest, most certain peace. Not pride, not victory, just, freedom. The kind I'd never known when I was chasing love that had conditions. I poured myself one last cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the leaves fall. It's been 5 years now. I'm 74. My name is still Maeve Whitlock. But when I introduce myself these days, I rarely have to add anything else. Folks out here don't care who you used to be. They care how you treat their dogs, and whether or not you return the garden tools you borrowed. I live on a small lavender farm about 20 minutes outside Eugene, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just a sloped wooden roof, a creaky front porch, and a view that stretches out across purple hills like a quilt someone stitched by hand. When the wind blows, the whole field hums with bees and soft fragrance. I don't lock my door. There's no need. Every morning I wake before the sun and walk the rows barefoot. The soil is soft and cool, and the plants grow neat and proud. Grace helps me run the place. She's 58, a widow, lost everything when her husband passed. We found each other through one of the support groups I host online. Now we run this little operation together, two women who've seen hell and came back stronger. The kitchen still runs on a wood-burning stove. I like it that way. The coffee tastes better, and it gives me something to do with my hands. After breakfast, I usually sit by the window and draft monthly reports for the Still Standing Trust. The fund has grown since I started it. What began with $5,000 and a folder has turned into a real movement. We've helped over 100 women so far, mothers abandoned, dismissed, left to fade into silence. We fund legal help, housing, sometimes even just a warm coat, whatever they need to start again. Once a week, I log into the online counseling group. Women from all over the country join, from trailers in the South, condos in Phoenix, small rooms in big cities. They talk, I listen. We don't heal everything in an hour, but we remind each other that we matter, that our stories aren't over just because someone else walked away. The house is quiet now, but never lonely. In the evenings, Grace and I sometimes sit on the porch with our tea. She tells stories about her younger days, her husband, her kids, the car they used to drive across Nevada. I listen. Sometimes I tell mine too, but I don't talk about the bad parts anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because I don't want to live there again. Griffin and Julian each call once a month. They've stuck to the boundary I set. No more, no less. It works for all of us. Buff Griffin runs a financial literacy program now, helping blue-collar workers understand credit, savings, and retirement. He's calmer these days, wears old flannel shirts and shops at discount stores. The first time he told me he fixed his own leaky faucet, I almost cried, but I didn't. Julian still manages the same apartment complex. He's opened a small home repair service for the elderly, no charge, just shows up with a tool belt and a smile. He sends me photos now and then, a fixed railing, a patched roof, a thank you card from an old man who hadn't had hot water in weeks. Braille doesn't call, but she writes. She teaches culinary arts at a high school in upstate New York, runs a student kitchen. From what I've heard, the kids love her. She signs her letters, from someone still learning. That's enough for me. I've been writing, too. My story, everything I lived through. It started as journal pages in the cabin, then turned into chapters, then a book. I signed a deal last spring to have it turned into a documentary. I made one condition. Every penny goes straight to the Still Standing Trust. Sometimes I reread the manuscript before bed. It doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like telling the truth to an old friend who won't judge you. Grace laughs at me when I say I'm retired. You're busier than anyone I know, she says. She's probably right, but it's a good busy, free kind. And then came a letter, just last Sunday. A little white envelope with purple stickers on the back. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Neat, bubbly, with little hearts instead of dots over the eyes. Inside was a folded note, on notebook paper. Dear Grandma Maeve, can I come visit your lavender farm sometime? I want to learn how to bake cookies and help you pick flowers. Love, Emily. Emily, my granddaughter, Griffin and Braille's daughter. I hadn't seen her since she was 6. She's 11 now, and her voice on that page was pure, untouched by the weight her parents had once carried. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and wrote back on my best stationery. Dear Emily, you are always welcome at my farm. I've been waiting to hear from you. We'll bake ginger cookies together and you can tell me all about your school. Bring old clothes. We might get messy. Love you more than words. Grandma Maeve. I sealed the envelope and walked it down the gravel road to the mailbox. Just past the lavender rows. The wind was gentle that morning. I could smell the sweetness from the fields, could hear the soft buzz of bees in the sun. As I stood there, I thought about what peace really meant. Not love from others, not even family, but the ability to sit with yourself, untouched by the old hunger to be needed, chosen, or forgiven. Peace, I've learned, is not about being loved. It's about learning how not to let anyone break you again. I don't tell this story to seek pity. I tell it to send a message. No pain is meaningless. No love should be taken lightly. And no mother deserves to be pushed away from the table of a story she built with her own blood, sweat, and tears. I am Maeve Whitlock, the woman who once scraped together every penny, every dream, every breath, to raise 2 children, only to become the burden they thought they had to discard. But I did not break. I rose. I claimed my seat in the spotlight, not because anyone granted me permission, but because I deserved to be there. I forgave, but I never returned. I loved, but I refused to be used. Because I've come to understand, the worth of a person isn't measured by how others see them, but by how they refuse to be diminished. So I ask you, if it were you, if one day you were cast aside by your family, your lover, your life, would you stay silent and endure? Or would you rise, pull your own chair back to the table, and lift your chin to live fully, unapologetically? I want to hear you, truly. If it were you, what would you do? May God bless you, and every woman who has ever been forgotten.